It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in Cape Cod. It's about a 2 hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever, and I had some money if I wanted to order pizza. Things were all good. The first night, I was alone. I stayed up until 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1. I made some plans to play some street hockey with my friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes on my phone, scrolling through Reddit and Twitter and whatnot, when I heard the front door open. The bathroom is directly up the stairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained and trying to hear anything else, but nothing. I figured it was just the wind, or maybe my parents were home early, so I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. So the stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in, so it's essentially like walking down a tighter version of this, but replacing the rail with a wall. So I can't see into the kitchen when I walk down. Even though my house is old, and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down all 12 of the stairs. So when I got to the second to last stair, right before I could see around the corner into the kitchen, I take a deep breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard another noise, and there's no reason for them to still be in there, even if it was burglars or something in the house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled at myself for being so stupid, and I just normally walked the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of my kitchen is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the most strangest, abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he rotated them to the point where they almost completely reversed, as well as lifting him a little bit behind himself. I don't know why I remember it so much, but it's just the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how creepy the situation was, but in the moment, I took a step towards him and punched him in the face as hard as I could, sort of half slapping, half pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I sprinted into my room and locked the doors behind me. I quickly put a chair up against the doorknob like you see in TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911. Nearly in tears, I told the operator what had happened. As I sat on the floor of my room, in practically the fetal position staring at the door, praying that the cop would be here soon, I noticed the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. This guy was standing right outside my bedroom door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of my door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying the man would just go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Sir, are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring my phone to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps, slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there, curled up, unable to even speak. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe, and I opened the door to 2 of them standing outside, and I almost cried. Nowadays, my parents don't even leave me alone anymore, thank God, and I check every lock on my house before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still, but I'm doing alright. Even working with sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found whoever was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street, smiling under a lamppost. The scariest part as I have no idea what he wanted or who he was. So I grew up in Las Vegas. I had moved there when I was in the second grade. I was around 7 or so when my mom started working at some sort of motorcycle repair shop in Arizona that just wasn't paying the bills all too well. She jumped at the offer of a new job, of course. Fast forward about 5 years. I'm in middle school now. My brother and I were almost exactly 2 years apart. I was about to turn 12, so he was 10 at the time. My mother, being quite low on the seniority list, was forced to work late nights. That left me and my brother home alone after school more often than not. Our nights were usually pretty uneventful, usually consisting of us avoiding whatever homework was assigned to us, warming up leftovers in the microwave, and watching whatever sparked our interest on the TV, which was usually either WWE wrestling or some kind of cartoon. We usually ended up in bed before our mom got home, but occasionally we wait up for her. One night, or I suppose one afternoon, considering it was still broad daylight, everything was pretty normal. My brother sat on the living room floor, engulfed in whatever was on the TV, and I was using my mom's desktop computer, feeding my virtual pets. Then, there was a rather aggressive knock at the door, which was very odd. I was sort of an outcast child. I didn't really have too many friends, nor did my brother. Even then, we lived in what you'd consider a senior living community. My mother was the youngest adult there, and was around her mid-30s. My brother, being too short to reach the peephole at the time, doesn't move, only slightly reacts and looks at me. I get up from the computer chair and make my way to the front door and glance out the peephole. I see a man in a black ski mask staring back at me through the peephole. It definitely didn't seem real. It seemed sort of like something from a cliche movie, as if he were dressed to rob a bank. I was immediately scared shitless, and I obviously didn't bother asking who it was. I silently stepped away, shut the TV off, grabbed my brother and our small black Pomeranian, and ran towards my bedroom. Once we were safely in the closet, I informed him of what I saw outside. He didn't say much, but was visibly shook up. I just quietly stood there, holding our dog. I slid the tiny flip phone our mom left us for emergencies from my pocket and dialed 911. I whispered to the operator the entire call, as I didn't think the man had left, considering the knocks persisted after we left the living room. Yet somehow, she understood me and sent an officer over. Immediately after the call ended with the operator, I dialed for our mother. I explained everything to her. She ended up leaving work early and ended up home around the same time the police had made it. I'm not quite sure what deterred him from pursuing further, but of course, the man was gone by the time they both arrived. The police officer was clearly not taking any of it seriously, most likely thinking these two young boys were just paranoid from staying home alone. It was probably some young man playing a joke on his friend, he said. However, like I stated previously, we lived in a senior living community. Who could he be possibly playing a joke on? His grandmother? He then gave me and my brother stickers, as if that would settle our nerves after seeing some masked man pounding on our door. Fortunately, I never saw the stranger after that. After that experience, however, my house had been broken into, as well as my car 3 times. Thankfully, none of us were present when any of this took place, since my family and I had moved out of state and installed a security system. I'll start off by saying that the following event probably would have been prevented. However, I was 11 at the time and trusted my mother Elizabeth to keep me safe, so I never thought about locking the garage door. At the time, the key to the padlock on the door was missing, so the next best thing was to push the lock up so it almost looked like it was locked. My mother figured that this was good enough, both because the door led into the backyard and because we were in the process of putting up privacy fence at the time. Now, the layout of the home is a pretty open concept. The garage is accessed through the laundry room, and from there, one can either turn right and enter the living room or left to enter the kitchen. On the kitchen side, at the end of the connected hall that spans the length of the house, is my room, and the other end was my mom's room. My brother's room and the bathroom are between our rooms in the hall. One night, my brother was staying with his dad, so the house was much more quiet than it was normally. It was just my mother and I, and my aunt's golden retriever Emma. My aunt had just recently suffered a fall and a broken leg, so Emma was in my care until she could be cared for by my aunt. Because of this, Emma's kennel was in my bedroom. This night was mostly quiet, which is why barking was so startling. I woke up at about 2 in the morning to the sound of Emma going absolutely berserk in her kennel, shaking the sides in an effort to get out. I got out of bed and went over, sticking my hands through the bars to try to calm her down and hopefully get her to go back to sleep. She momentarily stopped barking, and that's when I heard banging sounds coming from the garage. Now, as an 11-year-old, I was immediately panicked. I opened my door and rushed down the hall of my mom's room, shaking her awake and explaining to her that the dog was freaking out. I could hear noises, and I was scared. My mother, being not at all suspicious, told me that the raccoon probably found its way through the garage, and Emma could smell it. I figured that she must be right, and I agreed to go back to bed, hoping that everything would quiet down. After about 5 minutes later, I was lying in bed, and Emma was still going crazy. The noises that I could previously barely hear over her barking were now loud and crashing, much too loud for a raccoon to be making. Panicked again, I made my way down the hall to my mom's room for the second time. However, this time, I felt something watching me as I passed the opening into my living room. I turned my head back to look, and I was confronted with a figure at least 6 feet tall standing in my living room. In an instant, I was in a blubbering mess. I burst into my mom's room and shut the door, shaking her awake again, much to her annoyance, to tell her that a man was in the house. I've never seen another human wake up so quickly. She sprung out of her bed and flew down the hall, letting Emma out of her kennel and rushing through the back door into the yard, where the intruder had escaped. We called the cops after she checked the yard and found nothing but a discarded padlock tossed into the grass. I'm a girl who lives in a good neighborhood in suburban New York City. This happened back in early November of 2015. I was 17 years old, and with my boyfriend at the time, he was 18. He drove his car to my house around 8 p.m. after work and parked across the street. He couldn't stay long, only stopping by for a little bit because I hadn't seen him in a while. As time went on, we realized it was already 12 a.m., and it was time for him to start heading home. I walked him out the front door to my house, but we decided to talk a little bit more and hang out front of my house. It was already 12:30, and we were sitting on my front steps, with the only light being the street lights on the corner of my block and one of the main roads. He was ready to leave, so I gave him a hug and a kiss goodbye, and watched him walk to his car to make sure he was safe. The car was only a few feet from where I was, but I always worry. I sat out on the front steps as I watched him get into his car and make a U-turn to turn on the main road, which would lead him towards the direction of his house. Literally, the same second his car turns the corner and drives away, a man turns the corner of my block. I live in the corner house, and he starts walking with a fast pace. Before I could take another breath, he was already walking faster up the walkway to my front steps. I got up and yelled at him to go away, but he didn't listen. So I quickly got up and ran into my house, not looking behind me and almost missing the handle of my front door because I was sweaty and shaking. But thankfully, I got in safe and locked it. There is a window next to the front door which shows a clear view of the front of my house. When I looked outside, he was there. His back was facing the house, and he was on my front steps. I ran into the kitchen and took out the biggest knife I could find and hid on the floor behind the door, just in case he turned around and saw me. I could have sworn I saw a small metal object in his hand, almost like a knife. I called my boyfriend because he was only a few blocks away, and he turned his car back around. I didn't look outside until I heard the car door slam about 2 minutes later and saw him running to my house. I rushed him into the house, explaining what had happened. I was shaking and crying and could barely speak. Even though he is pretty big and muscular, he isn't the person who would run after this guy. I was scared to call the cops and fear my parents would wake up because my boyfriend was supposed to leave earlier than 12, and my parents would lecture me for being outside at 12:30 a.m. The whole event took place within a 10-minute interval. The guy was never found, and I couldn't recall what he looked like due to how dark it was outside. I only saw him for a split second running towards me, and he seemed thin, dark-skinned, and around 5'9"-ish. I had no idea what he wanted from me. He never said a word, and I don't know how long he waited for my boyfriend to leave so he could strike. It scares me to this day, knowing that someone was hiding around the corner, watching me and my boyfriend talk for about a half an hour. I have not had a similar encounter again after that. As a personal note, no matter how good of a neighborhood you live in, Please be cautious at night, and always be aware of your surroundings, and always make sure that you're not alone if you're out at night. Anything could happen, even a few inches from your own home. When I was growing up, my older brother raced flat track motorcycles, and as a result, my dad and him were gone most weekends during the racing season. Sometimes my mom, my younger sister, and myself would tag along, but my mom was never really into it, so she would keep my sister and me home most of the time and plan fun things for us girls to do during the weekend. This incident happened on one of the weekends where we stayed home back in 1987, so I was 10 and my sister was 8. It started out like any other Saturday, with my dad and brother gone. My mom took us out to eat at McDonald's, and we went to the mall, and then came home to play Monopoly and watch cable. At around 10 p.m., my sister and I started to get sleepy, so my mom brought out the sleeping bags for all three of us to sleep in the living room together. I had to ask my mom years later what time this was, because as a kid, I didn't pay any attention to the clock. So, around 2 a.m., someone starts banging on the front door. Our front door was pretty strange. It had 4 large panes of glass that weren't opaque, so they were covered with small curtains. We all woke up to the pounding and rushed to the door and looked out the windows, and there was a girl at the door. She was probably in her late teens or early 20s, and I remember her wearing a white and blue windbreaker. She's frantic and crying and begging my mom to let her in because she said her boyfriend is chasing her and she's afraid he's going to kill her. My mom remained calm as hell in this scary situation and said, "I'm sorry, love. I can't let you in. I have 2 young children with me and can't risk your boyfriend harming them if he gets in. I can call the police for you if you just stay there." Of course, that didn't sit well with the girl, and she started crying more, pointing at her foot that was broken and in a cast. "Please, ma'am, you have to let me in. He's coming for me." Again, my mom politely refused and turned and ran to the kitchen and called 911. Our phone was mounted on the wall in the kitchen with a ridiculously long cord, so she was able to go back to the door while on the phone with dispatch and told her that the police were on the way. This made the girl go even more crazy and said, "I don't need the police because I will be dead before they get here." My mom apologized again and said sorry, but she wasn't going to open the door. At that point, the girl just turned around and walked off into the darkness, and about 5 to 7 minutes later the police showed up. My mom gives a statement, and as she's doing so, my dad and brother come home from the race. My dad didn't even turn off the truck. He just ran up and looked terrified, asking what was going on. My mom is telling my dad what had happened. Another officer walked up and said that he didn't see anybody, but found a shoe in the street in front of my house. The police leave, and we all sit in the living room for a little bit to decompress, and I remember thinking that maybe my mom wasn't being very nice to the girl and she should have let her in. Fast forward to 2001, and it's about a week after I gave birth to my first son. Family and friends are at my house playing with my baby. After most people leave, there's just my parents, my sister, me, and my son sitting in my living room this time, and I made a comment about how I didn't really love the neighborhood we moved to, but I was proud of actually having my own home with my husband. Then my sister says, "Hey Mom, remember that lady that came to our door demanding to come in?" And my mom says, "Yeah, very well." At this point, I can tell my mom and dad weren't comfortable talking about it because they gave each other nervous glances. So, my sister, being the person that she is, says, "Why didn't you just let her in? I wonder if her boyfriend did end up killing her." My dad interjects and said that my mom did the right thing because it was late and we were home alone. Then he adds this little end to it. Plus, they ended up finding her car with her boyfriend smoking dope a few blocks over. They had rope, duct tape, 2 shovels, and a shit ton of knives in the truck. My sister and I said in unison, "What?" I asked my dad why we were never told about that, and my dad said that they decided not to tell us so that we wouldn't feel unsafe in our own home. Finding this out made me feel like such a huge jerk because I had always thought that my mom was being somewhat rude, and I always wondered what had happened to that girl. Now, I know my mom most likely prevented a home invasion with her tough but yet right decision to deny this girl entry to our home. Learning about this sent chills down my spine. Even writing about it now gives me goosebumps.